All right, we're at the 11-minute mark, so let's get rolling. So the next part of our discussion will be around how we blend virtual and physical environments and what our, oh, we lost Robin and she's coming back. And how
Stephanie,
we,
that might be I'm just going to quick interruption. I
please.
don't know that we heard the physical classroom group speak out.
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. Sorry.
I vote for Susan or Cynthia. Or both.
Okay. Susan, you're at the top of my screen, so why don't you get us started? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
You're back on mute again, Susan. Some double click maybe.
What is up with that? Is that better? Am I now not on mute? Okay. All of my clicking around trying to find the screen that has the thing I'm looking for. You know the thing I'm looking for, right? The notes that Laura took that were so fabulous during the session for physical space. So the physical space talked about, we looked at the questions that we had, and we did talk a little bit about the can learning be playful question. And yes, music and games, yes, learning can be playful. And hopefully that would be a good motivator, because that was a big question that we had that took up quite a bit of time too, was how are you going to create a space that speaks to the individual learner, whether that space is for them to learn alone individually or for them to learn in groups. So you could have one small group interfacing with another small group, and then also considering the physical environment of Mars itself and the fact that it's geographically challenging. If we don't modify the human genome in some fashion to be able to adapt to it, that means that there are going to be a lot of resources that go toward ensuring that it's a physical environment in which this version of humans can live, can survive in. And so that would be a commodity, right? So what is the best use of that physical space while you're also trying to address the needs of the individual learner at the same time? And then we also got to the questions of, what do you do when people don't want to learn? You have kids who are just like, I'm not into any of this. Now what? And then it kind of starts crossing into a societal question. It's like, well, that's a little out of the scope of what the topic, but it also addresses the needs for accessibility, right? Because maybe it's not that I don't want to learn, maybe it's I don't want to, or I'm unable to learn in the environment that you've set up for me specifically. So let's see, what else did we talk about? Oh, we talked about potentially having like a hologram so that you could also be physical and not just have to be plugged into something at all the time. So like a holodeck suite type of thing. And we talked about, right, so virtue spheres was one of the concepts that Cynthia brought in for us. And she also talked at length, and well, actually it wasn't even at length, it was just a little bit, about how she was able to have students create their own holodecks, their own virtual realities, and it was very engaging for them and had a positive effect. I would love to have you share that. Let me see if there's anything else. Access to technology, change from physical to virtual can be slow, and also the possibility that this is a future of imagining, right? So we may be able to have you might be able to just download all the knowledge that you need, but then you still have to put that into practice and process that knowledge in some fashion. So how could that get facilitated? Could we have learning pods individually? Could we have the holodecks? Could we have group spaces where one group classroom could talk to another group classroom? And I think that covers it. Did I miss anything? That went by really quickly. Sorry if that went by too fast for anyone. I would love if Cynthia could share, because I just thought it was such a wonderful idea, if that's okay, and if Cynthia's okay with it, with your hologram activity or holodeck activity.
I wonder, and Cynthia and Susan, I wonder if I could direct it or point us in in a direction. So I'm fascinated by this, the XR group's comment about, of course, now I can't find it, but about smell and taste and touch and, the senses. And I know you brought that up as well, Cynthia, early in our conversation. So those virtue spheres that you create for your students, and they create them too, I think. Do you imagine, or do we have the technology for those senses, for the touch and smell and taste experience? Am I making sense? I know I'm kind of going out
Well,
there, but
no,
I'm
They're definitely in
fascinated by that.
development. Yes, I've heard about a lot of technology that will allow us to feel the physical touch sense, and then I don't know about smell, but Ruben, do you know of something relating to smell?
Yeah, there have been projects around smell. The question is always the range of smells and how much people are willing to accept the smell. But there have actually been commercial developments for enhancing VR with smells and so on. The founder of Macromedia sponsored one of those projects some years back. I don't think you can buy any of that nowadays. I think it's all
In the
gone goodbye. But yes, there's been work done on that.
Excellent. So that's, that's important, is to have that continuity of the experience by including all the senses.
But then hearing from Cynthia, and I was trying to direct us towards all that wonderful work that you do to make students, it's inclusionary work, and it's motivating, and you talked about authentic learning and authentic assessments regarding these environments that they create for themselves.
I'm not, I hear 3 or 4 different things. To the scent, they just won, there were 3 award winners at the Augmented Reality World Expo with over 5,000 participants about 2 weeks ago. And OVR won for their scent technology. So that is, I think it's supposed to be available. I didn't realize it was only research. Secondly, there have been so many breakthroughs over the last 2 years because of the need, right? And the interest, the affordances that technology provides. But my thoughts are, what my students have been doing is creating their own learning environments, or their own experiments, their own worlds, their experiences, right? And then I put software on it, very simple. I just drag the code into their objects that allows it to all be on a holodeck. So we grab all these pieces, we put them inside one thing that winds up being the button or the thing you select to make that world appear. So it's a student-generated series of worlds, and all of them map in some way to our course concepts, but they're very different. And of course, they full of self-expression. Like one set of students might create Dr. Demento and do something with music and the history of music and how it relates to our course concepts. And another might do something very practical and targeted. But what's nice about this is everyone with no prior knowledge, no prior awareness of the world, and who's very fearful the first day they come in, within just a few weeks are creating these things. And then we can store them, and they can take them to conferences and click the button and their world appears around them. So now presentations are no longer, let's just look at PowerPoint, but let's make sure we have enough resources to be able to res this space around our bodies and share it with our audiences and with others. And then be able to collaborate and share with others, the notion of having good permissions, so that everyone can take part and everyone has a voice. So those are the things that were important to me. Is and then what I do is I'm not measuring just the outcome. I'm measuring the process of learning as people struggle, as the learners solve problems for themselves, explore, hit roadblocks, look for resources. And I provide just a little bit of guidance after they have a certain amount of struggle, because the struggle is what causes them to have that self-discovery that's critical, for them remembering years later, right? My goal is not to focus on short-term memorization and facts, but instead on how to apply them to situated problems. And sometimes these problems are loosely constructed. They're not, like math problems. Anyway.
Thank you for that, Cynthia. And before we transition into how to integrate everything, Ruben has some thoughts on how we can approach this.
Yeah, so thanks, Stephanie. So thanks everybody first for the presentation of the work of the breakout groups. That's great. Gives me a good idea of where you've been at together with the document that I've also been reading. So a couple of thoughts here, because as you're looking to integrating the work of the groups, one thing that can help is to think about these type of, it's something I brought up in the presentation on science fiction as metaphor, the fact that you're not looking for infinitely open metaphors. You're looking for these metaphors that focus on possibilities in difficult or constrained environments, right? That's one of the possibilities. And one of the things that I think you can use here as a basis for the integration that I think might work, and I've actually talked about this with the other two groups as well, is the fact that what you're looking at for Mars here, for our metaphor, for our driving environment, if you will, for this work, is idea of a colony. And that's important. It's important because we're not saying it's a research station, okay? McMurdo in Antarctica, I've mentioned this in a couple of groups, you may have already heard me talk about this. McMurdo in Antarctica is a research station. It's an amazing place. I really will get to McMurdo someday. I really would love to. But it's a research station. And one of the things that McMurdo is not, it's not a colony. If tomorrow flights or ships to McMurdo stop, the day after that, everybody has to pack up and leave, because they don't have any way of creating their own food, their own supplies, and there's no way they can transition. The whole thing is designed as a research station. And that's very important. But what we're talking about here on Mars is a colony. A colony is not a research station. A colony has to have its own economic life. It has to be able to make its own food. And in the case of a colony on Earth, you can still think of some trading and so on, but on Mars, you're going to get at most one spaceship of supplies every so many months, if you're lucky, or if maybe there's an asteroid nearby, but that's not likely, okay? Certainly not for the first generation of colonists, at least. So you need to think of a colony that can make its own life. So when you're thinking about the education system and integrating these two aspects you've been working on, think about that. Think about saying, well, what type of education system does a colony need? What does it? It's not a question of whether you like. You can speculate infinitely, because, as I say, you don't make your food. You can't go to the big box store to pick up boxes of food. That's it. You're done. So you need to be able to think about also the type of things that might happen that you haven't foreseen. The Apollo missions looked very tidy from the outside, but I've read the interviews and the transcripts of conversations with the astronauts. Armstrong, for instance, was up to the very last minute of the Apollo 11 landing, figuring out the messes that the computer was making that wasn't working properly, what they were looking at through the window versus what they had seen on the original telemetry. Were you going to land on dust or rocks or what? So lots of last minute decision making down to the last second. Okay, that's the life of a colony in any situation like the one we're talking about here. So again, you want to be thinking perhaps about a system that's less of learning just in case and more of a learning because, or learning in time. And yes, interest and passions are key to this, because nobody's going to want to do this if on top of being in this deeply constrained environment, you're working against their interests. So that's another aspect. How do you negotiate that? How do you negotiate that integration? So that's what I would suggest looking at. Think about how the needs of a colony, the structure of a colony, how that can help meld these two strands you've worked on, which aspects come to the foreground, which ones you might say, well, that's nice, but that might need to wait for later, or might need to serve a different function. Anyhow, just a thought that I thought might help.
So Ruben, since we have you and your insights here with us, what do you think should be one of the top considerations for physical environments, and let's say one for physical and one for virtual environments?
I would suggest that the considerations for both should be in terms of the virtual. For instance, think about the type of experiences you'd want the children, the students, the learners to have that would be too dangerous or too unavailable or too scarce, right? In other words, how much of that can you bring? Can you also bring the type of experiences that might help stimulate creativity, imagination, so that they remember? It's what I was saying about Armstrong. You want all of your learners to be able to be Armstrong in the moment, to be able to improvise solutions, etc. So I would suggest that that's what you want to look at. And in terms of the physical, also think about where does the tangibility of something communicate something that cannot be communicated otherwise. You know, in one of the groups I was talking about how the world is seeded with cues as to how to use it or to interact with it, right? You go up to a door, and doors, you know, you have this expanse. It's really quite a complicated mechanism. I mean, it's the surface, it's going to swing, it swings in one direction and so on. But there's only one thing you can see grasping there, a handle, right? And that's by the way, when you see badly designed doors, you know, where on earth am I reaching for the handle, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe very pretty, but as a door, it's not so great. So, you know, think about that. Think about in the physical, how can the cues of the physical world help drive that understanding? You need to be very economical. Again, you don't have a world where you can say, and now we're going to go there and we have a field trip over there. You're in a colony. Where can the affordances of that physical world you construct be as rich and as richly suggestive as possible? So that's what I would suggest in that context. Again, and these are just some components. So please don't take these as exclusive of anything else. These are just some seeding places I would suggest.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So Laura, as our official note taker and maker of sense of all the things that we're talking about, how do you feel like we should approach the next steps of getting our worksheet to a presentable format? And that-
Presentable? It isn't presentable? What's wrong with it? Come on now.
We have 30 minutes left together. What should we be doing with that time?
Well, I mean, we got to talk about what the two questions that Ruben just put to us, and
That's
I put
right.
them in the chat, and you know, like, so I don't think we really have to discuss the what to do next. I want to hear from some participants. So what is scarce? What is dangerous? How does that I'm not going to be able to rephrase it better than Ruben. How does that sort of change our imaginations about what we're building? And what are the cues? Like, what are the cues going to be for moving around physically while learning, I guess?
We talked about needing gravity if we don't bioengineer the humans that are going to be living there.
Right.
And-
I would also add in our digital apparel. What are we going to have? Are we going to design our clothing to be digitally infused with technologies that will help with our heart rate, which they have already in our physical world, in our oxygen consumption, in our CO2, and are we going to bring a carbon footprint to Mars, and how are we not going to pollute that environment? How are we going to protect that environment as well?
So I recently found or came across in my news feed an article that was a picture from one of the rovers of a plastic or something that it had shed and left behind. It was like, oh, already leaving plastic behind on Mars. So that's a really good point, Roxanne. It made me think of that.
In the physical classroom group, we were, knowing the dangers outside and the outside environments, we knew that we were going to be driven indoors for learning. So indoors and also the, indoor spaces will be a luxury really, and they'll be much smaller. So that's how we started thinking about what does it mean to have different needs as learners, learners living together or learners learning together. And so that's an intersection with the virtual, I believe, is that indoor experience, wearing the digital clothes, for example, dealing with human contact, but also motivating learners in close quarters as well, but also giving them a sense of freedom. I'm speaking very philosophically because that's what I tend to do. Who would like to speak more concretely to some of these topics and intersections?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm imagining that all these search engines that we have on our computers are now the size of my blood cell, and they've been injected in me. And I'm able to connect seamlessly with these search engines and trying to imagine what kind of a human being do I become. I guess a very super smart person who can speak any language through Google Translate, which is already infused in my body, who can compute numbers very quickly. And there's just so much that could happen by that mere connection between myself and an AI engine, which is infused internally in my body. Thanks.
That's a really good point of what, when we start talking about physicality of an environment, what is actually going to be needed, because we're, looking at Elon Musk developing the neural sensor that you can just plop right in your brain there. And then we don't need a lot of the physical things to communicate because that's already being happening in your mind. So, and what's been injected in you, as Tula was mentioning, and what's already, but just part of your being at that point. So that does add an interesting dimension to this.
I was thinking, what if we focus like those indoor spaces to be designed around, our human needs as we need them, right? It's shelter, it's community, it's culture. But then I think, the biggest question we have about living on Mars is, what about Mars? Well, if we have our shelters and our secure environments, could we then, while we still can have kind of like humans doing the exploration, isn't there an opportunity to have those be remote controlled drones, or even AI, or sending out some kind of, sci-fi probe to go and scan the environment? It's going to be high enough fidelity that we can just put in our AR, VR goggles on, or just, flip a switch and then see what the drone is seeing. Could that then remove the need to cultivate the external space, the environment, and leave it for preservation and research?
From a land preservation standpoint, that seems ideal, as well as, carbon output as well. So something that I saw mentioned in chat that what we haven't talked about much is how much of education on Earth will be available on Mars and vice versa. Will those be seamless? Do we want to share all resources? Do we want to have Mars specific learning so that we can, cultivate the community there? What do you guys think that looks like?
I think we should focus on being humans, as we're trying to be interplanetary. Why would we then persist with these kind of segregations of our ideas and understanding? We are human beings at our core, and to share our knowledge with each other and the, research and understanding of the universe, I think should be fully accessible for development, for technology, learning, culture, focusing on what makes us human instead of, what we think about and want to, exclude from others. I don't know, maybe that's too.
No, that's a good point. But I could see some kind of segregation of the folks on Mars being super early adopters and thinking, oh, those folks back on Earth, they're missing out because they didn't take advantage of this opportunity. But who knows? What we're going in a whole different direction with that. But yeah.
Or they're, well, I mean, humans are really prone to tribalism, just generally speaking. We all, you seek others who are similar to you in some fashion, in some way. So how do you end up a couple generations in having people who are like, I'm human, but I'm not one of the Earth humans. I'm a Mars human, and that makes me different from an Earth human. And so what about the stresses?
Yeah, and to Roxanne's point, someone born on Mars, what does biophilic design mean to them in a physical environment? Because they don't know Earth like we know it. And what does that do to the creation of environments, physical environments conducive to learning?
I think the types of things people would learn on Mars are going to be different than, if you look back at history, humans and communities, they learned what they needed to learn to survive in their community. So, and as our technology has changed, we had to learn more and more and have higher education and like get more into science and everything. Like everything sort of changed along the way. When we think about Mars, for the first and foremost, they're going to have to learn how to survive there, how to interact, how to, they need to, their set of knowledge is going to be different than ours. And that goes with what you're saying. And if they're born there, they don't know anything about here. They just know what they need to know to, so they'll have a specific, the technology will be different because their survival will be different than ours.
Right. So if we're looking at this in the time we have left as creating a utopian, not specific to Mars, but just a utopian education system that we're designing, what insights can we give the rest of the attendees here, the Shaping EDU community at large, to really help them create some goals, lofty as they may be, or attainable, to where we want to take the education system that we have and get it a little closer to where we think it needs to be.
Before you start on that, I'm just going to thank you all for a minute for your work. It's been fascinating listening to you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the final integration looks like. I have to excuse myself now. I need to go do a little bit of setup for that final stage. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
I'll see you back in the main room in a little bit. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Don, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, it seems to me that technology is going to become an integral part of that future we are imagining. And therefore, access to technology will be key. But also our willingness to adapt to the technology that is already before us and to work with it. Thanks.
Yes, agreed.
I think we can also think about like the emphasis on perspective, just ensuring that everyone within the system is aware of not only the perspectives that they have as a learner, right? So if they're coming from Mars, they know that they grew up on Mars, but then allowing them to see the perspective of others, those who maybe are on Earth or who are exploring the cosmos. It's the cultural, physical, and intellectual perspectives that we cultivate individually, but making sure that that awareness is raised so that there isn't kind of a jump to assumptions, a jump to they don't know, but instead we can all learn, we can all understand and then appreciate and build instead of kind of delineate and compartmentalize. Although that will be necessary as we explore our passions, right? Then you can develop the technology you're passionate about. You can engage with the environments that you care about. And then those can then cultivate into an understanding and greater perspective for all of us instead of this kind of micro segmentation we've been following.
And that's a great insight to apply to the challenge we were talking about in the physical environments group about what do you do? What we're mandating that people are in a physical place. It has to happen to a certain extent. But what do you do with learners that don't want to learn? And then I think that begs the question, have they just not found the thing that they're passionate about? If they're completely apathetic to life, that's a whole different conundrum to deal with. But if you're, I think that puts the onus a bit on the what we were calling, learning experience facilitators. I'm taking your term, Roxanne, and using it a bit differently, where we're not just calling them educators or teachers, they're guiding you through an experience. At what point is it on that facilitator to figure out what the passion of that person is in a young age to get them onto a path where they can thrive? There's definitely a challenge there.
I think that can be expanded through AI as well. I was kind of typing away during our break, but if we have AI that's integrated into this facilitator relationship, then that energy, that heavy lift of building those connections between the individual's passions and what they're trying to learn can be done at instantaneous speed.
Yeah.
If that is a tool that's enabled to not just connect learners to passions, but also passions to other experts, then you can build these communities that are self-reciprocating and not, kind of leaving people left to be apathetic. Because if they want to be a creator, then they can be a creator and they can collaborate with other creators if that's the way they want to learn instead of the absorbing.
And I think it's some kids will know that at 9-10 years old. It's in them and they know it, and that's what they want to do, and they want to connect with people who inspire them and really create a community around that passion. And then it takes some other people longer, time in their lives to find that. And not to say that that's the only thing you can do. You can pivot at some point if, I can't remember the statistic right off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 don't exist today. So we have to be able to be nimble as we create these learning environments. And, the other statistic that I remember very vividly from ASU GSV in April was that there will be more change to learning and education in the next 7.5 years, which will get us to 2030, than there have been in the last 75 years. So we're spitballing a bit here because we don't know all the technology that will be developed in the next 7.5 years. And I think the ability for us to be creative and be nimble and be prepared and open to new things as they're introduced is really important. And I will now get off my soapbox.
I was just going to add a very quick supporting word to the whole group and to what you just said, Stephanie. I find it fascinating as I'm taking notes that we're really not talking about technology per se. We're writing a manifesto of principles and ideals, almost a constitution of egalitarianism. You can use a different word there, but it's almost like a way we want to live and treat each other. It's a humane sort of enterprise.
And
So
you
that-
really nailed it there, Laura, because my intention after this event is to create an open letter that embodies all of the things that these three teams are working on, and take all of these things that we're discussing there. We're asking important questions, and we're allowing ourselves to be humble and to be open to learning new things. But in doing that, we do need some framework to guide us to where we need to be. And one of the things that happened at ASU GSV that was a bit off-putting to me was I'm in a room of 2,000 plus people, and we were talking about the 2030 goals, and they asked everyone to raise their hands if they thought we would hit our SDG 4 2030 education 2030 goals by 2030, and not one person raised their hand. And then the question was asked, who thinks we'll be halfway there? And about 5 people raised their hand. So we're woefully ill-prepared for where we wanted to be in 2030. So the intention of this discussion, this event, everything that we're doing is to really put us on a path to where we can thrive sooner than 2030 if possible, but at least by 2030 hit the goals that we aspire to. And I said I'd jump off my soapbox, but I didn't. So I'll get back off it now. Susan, I think you
You
had
do, Gwen.
something.
I do. I love what you just said, Sophie, about what Laura said about the manifesto and what you were saying about creating an open letter that contains all of that. It kind of underscores, and especially the conversations that we've been having here, underscore how education and an educational framework really intersects so strongly with the society in general, because so much of what we've said just has been like, well, but that depends upon how the society is built. Or are we talking about the society now? Or are we just talking about the educational system? Are they the same to some extent? Is one a reflection of the other? Are they just, but I love that. And it brings to, because I was at ASU for 11 years too, managing the budget system there, which is not related, but one thing that ASU does very well is remind you that Arizona State University does very well is remind you that accessibility and impact are extremely important for your educational edifice and how it interacts with the community, that both supports it and that it supports. And so this whole exercise really kind of underscores that relationship between the society and the community and the educational constructs.
That actually reminded me of a great metaphor I've been thinking about through Space Camp. And it's not even space related, but I think for such a long time, we've been considering society, okay, here's the metaphor. If you think of society as a pizza, we've been thinking of education as one of the toppings, one of the ingredients. But I think what I've learned is that it really needs to be the sauce. It's what brings our society, the crust, our government, our systems, that we all kind of stack on top of. But then it connects all of the entities, all of the ingredients that we put on top of this pizza. And I don't know, that was my brainstorm today. So hopefully that makes some sense.
John, I'm going to ask you to repeat that when we get in the plenary. So remember what you just said. Okay, so to Lisa's point, let's get refocused on what we're doing here. And so Lisa and Laura, do you want to walk us through the next 12 minutes, and we'll get on track to being prepared to present, and you can decide which of the two of you or whoever you choose will go over our team's topics.
I think that's a yes.
So looking at our page, we need to do is come up with like some recommendations for our, after all our discussions. God, we could, I feel like we've talked about everything under the sun, which has been wonderful. But we need to come up with actual recommendations and also look at what intersections we might have with the other, the other groups, what has, with our recommendations, how does that interact with what they might have bringing forward?
So Lisa, how many total recommendations shall we impose on ourselves? What number shall we limit ourselves to?
Well, they've got 3 bullet points, so I would imagine that has to be at least the minimum.
Right. So you all, I don't know if you see where I've been putting notes. I've been putting it in the topic section, but I just put it in the chat. So rather than creating a poll, why don't we do like a round robin? So please only state your top 3, and we'll try to get a vote going here. Top 2, top 3, what do you want to see go into the recommendations? Access, adaptability, technology in the built environment. I don't need to read it out, but who wants to go first? How about you, Jane? Are you with us? Jane? Okay, let's go to Susan. top 2 or 3?
Heavens, I think technology in the built environment.
Okay,
I think adaptability to and of technology.
you don't have to do 3 if you don't want.
Well, I'll go with those two because like
Okay,
I can't do 3 because now I want to add like 3 more.
I know, it's hard. John, we'll get it done though. John, what are your top 2 or 3?
Okay, I think perhaps creation and changing environments and yeah, that's one. And then
Okay.
oh gosh, I want to say integration with AI because that's very
Okay.
all encompassing.
Now, hold on, John, when you say that, do you want that also to be tied in with the way I tied it in with this idea of that you have a guide
Yes.
to, yes, okay, good.
Yes,
Guided
I very
learning.
much see AI as like the interface, the next interface of the internet, right? We can
Gotcha.
talk to
You chose
something-
2. Do you have one more?
I think nature, socialization, and exploration, or is that was that
That's the same as creation. So
Okay.
you,
okay.
in fact, have chosen 2,
Cool.
just like Susan.
Works for
Roxanne,
me.
we now have 3, so that's,
No, I think I.
we have 4, we have 4.
I think
Roxanne.
I chose the same one, so let me change mine.
No, don't change. That's how we get to a vote.
Okay, I'll
That's how we get to consensus. Don't change.
be down in this categories.
Love it. Cynthia, do you have any new ones? We've got technology in your built environment. I can't talk. See, okay, adaptability, then actually one of your ideas from the chat, Cynthia, that the need for nature creation in a changing environment, and then integration with AI. Anything else?
Yeah, I was going with your list, so I listed these 3 from your list.
Okay, good. Passion. Good. Okay, we're really getting somewhere.
Because
you
Ruben
all.
said if we don't survive, our learning process is not going to work.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then, yeah, we could have done this in the chat, but that's okay. Tula?
I will go with integration with AI,
Okay,
passion for learning,
yep.
Mhm.
and all that being built, technology being built in the environment.
Okay. So we're at 4 right now, which is pretty good. Barnaby?
Okay, trying to play nice. The learning experience facilitators and its inclusion with the AI, the mechanical Turk approach is
Yep.
one that takes advantage of both, which leads me to are you kidding me? He's adding. I think that the blurring of synchronous and asynchronous is a modality that we all face, and I believe that that's going away. I believe that a
Oh.
just-in-time, robust, immersive learning environment is what we should expect from our engineers who are building a system that should, at that point, leverage quantum in its compute and network capacity. So the just in sight or broadband connections or a pipe that connects us doesn't have to exist anymore. And if we're in Mars or in a refuge center, you should have the full immersive experience that reflects that need. So I would refer to that as a just in time immersive learning. So yes, he did throw something else out there.
I know.
Sorry,
that's all
Laura,
right.
as you're
We'll get
driving
it in the
consensus.
notes. We'll get it in the notes.
And lastly, I
Is-
think universal learning as a framework, one that ensures that we're reflecting the needs of all students, not just those who are struggling or gifted, but every single individual.
Payment? Are you with us, Payment?
I'm basically agree with most of the things that have been said.
Oh, but you got to say top 2, top 2.
Well, I would say just the universal learning. I agree with that one.
Okay.
I do feel that it has never been a reality, even though theory exists. No such thing has
All
been.
right. I'm moving people along here. What's your second vote?
The second one would be basically adjusted learning approach, so that they will all basically learn at the same anytime they want to, not just the time that is picked by the educator or by the institution.
The blurring of synchronous and asynchronous, correct?
Yes.
Okay, David McGraw.
So the technology and the environment, the learning experience facilitators, and I'll go ahead and say that that just-in-time learning also.
Now, is that the same as blurring of synchronous and asynchronous? Is that what you all mean when you say just-in-time learning? Because I don't know that lingo. I know synchronous, asynchronous, but I don't know just-in-time learning.
I think that's how Barnaby described it.
Okay, good.
I describe it again. We're either face-to-face with instructors and classmates, or we're doing this in a canned. And it always feels like asynchronous is a step down. It's tier 2, second citizen. And a just-in-time immersive learning experience or learning environment or capacity, it takes that distinction and that lack of richness, robust, tailored experience away. Everyone should be able to connect to the best.
Well, that's our number one. Thank you, Barnaby, for explaining that too. And so succinctly, right? So concisely. That's an exciting future, or exciting vision for the future. That's really just around the corner, right, Barnaby? I'm talking to you as I'm counting here. I'm kind of surprised, and you can disagree with me, but I think our number 2 is this business of technology supports need for nature, socialization, etc., and changing environments. Okay, so I'm going to put that in as the number 2.
From a sustainability science perspective and sustainability across all facets, technology has been identified as the super determinant, not just for health, but also for sustainability. And if we think of the capacity that
Okay,
that would
Barnaby,
then,
I'm just going to stop you there. And I am seeing sort of a tie between technology built into the environment and this sort of new topic that has emerged in our group, which is the just-in-time, this conversation with David and Barnaby. So we may have to have a tiebreaker. Technology built into the environment versus
Do you mean technology built into the environment, or do you mean technology supports need for nature, socialization, exploration, creation in changing environments?
No, that's our number 2. That is a clear number 2.
That's the
that's
clear
a
number
winner.
2. Okay, so
I'm talking about
technology in the
number
built
3.
environment is number 3. Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 2 choices for number 3 in the chat. Okay, that means number 3 is going to appear twice. I could do 3A and 3B.
You know
How's
what?
that
I'm
sound?
gonna let you guys have 3. How about that?
Let us
You
have
can do that.
4.
3 or
No,
4, you
we would need 4, Stephanie.
Got
Yeah,
one
yeah,
and
take
2.
4.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
let's just
We're
take
gonna
4.
have 4.
There you go.
Yay.
And with
Um,
that, we need to go into
yeah.
the other room.
I know. I'll get it into the document, okay?
Okay, fantastic. And who's gonna present? Have we decided?
Ooh, not me. Lisa, please.
Lisa, you good with that?
Yep.
I don't think she is.
Well, someone
I'm
else can
good.
present too.
I'm okay. As long as I have it in
Would
front
you
of
like
me,
to present?
I'm okay.
Are you sure?
As long as it's in front of me.
I don't want to peer pressure you into doing something you're not comfortable with.
Oh, God, no. I'm never comfortable with anything, but that's okay. If it scares me, do it, right? That's what they
Turn it
say.
into Eeyore.
If it scares, I always say if it scares you a little bit, just do it.
Don't be
Just
scared.
do it.
We're a nice bunch. All right, I'll see you guys back in the main session.